Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature, the wild world of wolverines, presented by Brad Josephs. Brad is NatHab's staff naturalist interpreter and has been guiding for us worldwide since 2005. Thanks for being with us today, Brad. I'll hand it over to you.
Hey, thank you guys. I really appreciate tuning in again. We're getting, as we're getting more and more of these webinars, we have the ability to sort of specialize in some of the more obscure topics, like mine on ravens last week. And so as I've been guiding in Alaska for over 20 years, that's up to see the brown bears or the polar bears in Churchill in Canada. So, but there's other creatures up there that most people aren't drawn to or know much about, but it's always fantastic to, when we draw people into brown bear country or polar bear country, to tell our folks all the other amazing things about the animals that live in that area, in that region. Ravens, like I said last week, is one for sure, a magical thing that most people don't know as much about. And for sure, wolverines are one that a lot of people don't know much about, but they're definitely, some people have heard the reputation. So for me, this was definitely one of my most memorable and exciting wildlife sightings in my life. This picture that I'm showing here is my first wolverine sighting, and I had spent, and that was in year 2000, and I'd spent a lot of time in wolverine country. But everybody always knows that you could spend your whole life in wolverine country and never see a wolverine in the wild. So it was early on in my first season on the Katmai coast guiding. Now I was out, and we saw this small animal running on the beach, and it was being pursued at high speed by two subadult male brown bears, big guys, but they were, young. And the wolverine outran them. But I had a hard time telling what it was. I wasn't expecting to see the wolverine. But when it finally, swam across the river, stood up on its hind legs, looked at those bears, and I realized that what I was seeing was a wolverine. It was kind of like I was seeing a Bigfoot, because it's that sort of reputation that wolverines are incredibly difficult to see in the wild. And why is that? And it's because they have enormous ranges, like up to 600 square miles, and there's just not that many of them, and they're just not they're just not an animal that there's ever so many of. But and then I'll talk later about the conservation issues, why they're disappearing. But I just want to explain how amazing these creatures are, and they have the tremendous, nasty, ferocious reputation. Later on, I think I've seen at this point 12 wolverines in the wild by now. And then one of the occurrences, but this is actually the only still picture that I got, and it's terrible. It's from a 300 millimeter film camera. Then I basically took a picture of that print and tried to doctor it up. This was actually doctored up a long time ago, just with terrible editing stuff for maybe 2004, but it doesn't matter to me. It's just like my Bigfoot picture. And I've seen them in the later on, and I've gotten some decent footage. Well, I can't say decent, but I've gotten some footage of them. But it's just the fact that I don't have beautiful pictures of wolverines just goes to show how much mystique they have, because I've spent so much time in wolverine country. But the one time where I had a phenomenal opportunity to get images, I didn't have my camera with me, and I was out on the Katmai coast, and I was hiking along with two people, and we heard a rustling in the bushes, and I was wondering what it was, and I couldn't really tell exactly what it was, but I was cautious, and we just froze, and it was very close to us, maybe 10 feet away. And then I realized that there was a wolverine running right towards us, but nose to the ground. It wasn't looking. It was following a trail back to this tree where something was rustling around. And it came up within 6 feet of me and looked at me with a stare that could turn a soul to stone. But for me, I just became like, it turned my soul to gold, because I realized that a wolverine was staring right at me from 7 to 10 feet away. Looked at me with absolutely no fear, walked into the bushes and grabbed something and ran up the hill, and came back down and grabbed something else, ran up the hill, and I realized it was moving its kits. its babies that were put in a cave, a small cave. And I just, it was just unbelievable. So she just realized that we were close, we're people. She just moved her babies out. So I turned to the folks that I was with, and they were from France and also Scotland. And there was two of them. And they just didn't know, they never really heard of Wolverines, or didn't have the understanding of how incredible that experience was, like something that most people will never ever get in their life, to get a close view. And I said, that was Wolverine. They said, what is it, like a beaver? I said, no, beaver's a rodent. So anyway, I understood. So I explained to them. So that's what I'm going to do for you guys. Wolverine is one of those things out there in our North American wilderness. It symbolizes wilderness. And they're just something that is just the kind of thing that legends are made of. So those are some of my experiences with Wolverines. And then my buddy Drew Hamilton, who I always mention in every webinar because he's amazing, he had a similar experience, but he had his camera with him. So he let me borrow these pictures to show of a Wolverine that came up to him at McNeil River State Game Sanctuary when he was a ranger there. Walked right up to him and looked him in the eye. And it was investigating, I think, a fox den. And I think maybe it was looking to prey on the foxes. And the parents were just absolutely not fazed at all. So I always give credit to the people that let me borrow their pictures. And I just want to show you. And I made a typo right here. This is Drew HH, if you want to follow him on Instagram. In fact, he posted this picture this morning because I asked him to dig it up and send it to me, and then he decided to post it. But so it's Drew Hamilton, and then he sells pictures at his drewhh.com. So Drew HH. So thanks, Drew. Once again, something amazing from McNeil River. He's going out to Nittany Bay today, which is the new proposed industrial port route for the Pebble Mine, so he can begin to document what habitat we're going to lose if the Pebble Mine goes through, and that includes Wolverine habitat. But I guess the point is that getting Wolverine pictures in the wild is not something that you can ever put in your bucket list. It's actually a lot more difficult than snow leopards even. But there is one place, and this is was sent to me by very good friends Art and Krista Ryan. This is taken by Krista, and Art's kind of is her husband, and but also kind of like her manager for her pictures and stuff, and got this incredible picture. And this is actually something that's not that rare to get. It's a wild Wolverine, and it's in Finland. There's a place that you can go and sit in the blind, and they do feed some of these brown bears, these wild brown bears, Eurasian brown bears, to get fairly close to this very, very shy bear. And Wolverines actually also come up, and so it's not unheard of, not super rare to actually get up close, pictures of wild Wolverines. So thanks, Art and Krista, for letting me share that, just to show that there are ways. I'm a huge camera trap person, but now that I've gotten snow leopards on camera traps lots and lots and lots of times, this is definitely on my bucket list to capture. So this was sent to me yesterday by my friend, Facebook friend Chester Dodgson, and he lives up in Alberta, Canada, and he's gotten some pretty amazing game camera shots of Wolverines. And I think that this was a great one that I wanted to show because it shows their fur. So I'm just going to talk about some of their characteristics. And that fur is incredible. It's beautiful, just long and shaggy. And it is very specialized and allows them to live in very, very cold places. And I'll show you the range map, but they live in the northern hemisphere, only places where it's similar to like polar bears, only places where it's incredibly cold. And the way they allow that is that fur, that beautiful sort of legendary fur. And that fur is very legendary. So when you're up in the super cold climate of the Canadian Arctic, Alaska, Siberia, you want to have a parka made out of fur. So you have an Inuit here, and he's got a sealskin coat, which is one of the best, warmest kinds of fur. But you'll see he's got I think it's a wolf ruff around there. So that's going to, trap his body heat and allow him breathing. He'd be breathing in like a warm tunnel. So that's really important. That's why a parka hood is very important. And then the fur you have on the outside is very, very important, because what you don't want is what happened to this guy, is that you get all frosted, and then that frost begins to melt with your breath, and then the fur gets wet and it loses its insulative value. So what you want is to be able to like shake that frost off. That's very important to keep you're warm at like -40 and colder. Well, this woman here, she's got Wolverine fur ruff. And why? And it's legendary, is the Wolverine fur has this amazing ability to resist frost. It will still frost up, but all you need to do is just shake it. It just shakes right off, unlike any other fur in nature. So it's definitely legendary for its, and very, very valuable. Now, why is that? I've always wondered why, because you hear about it from locals and from people like the Wolverine fur is definitely the best to have. So why though? And I've researched it and asked people, and nobody knows. And then finally, I found a really cool article recently on this blog called Truth About Fur. It's a blog, and people have actually done some studies recently on what is it about Wolverine fur. And they looked at the microscope. Is it hydrophobic? I mean, is it repelling water? No, it's not. So what is it about it? Well, and to be honest, it's still a mystery. And some people said that there's some special barbs on it, which kind of resist the formation of frost. And the tip of their fur, the end of it, is barbed. However, the middle of it is very smooth. So whatever it is, it's a very, very unique fur with incredible tensile strength also. But it resists fur. So all you just do is brush it, and everything falls off before it kind of freezes to the fur. And I can't tell you why. I still can't tell you why. But whatever it is it works. It always has worked. And I know it's sad. I'm talking about animal conservation, but anyway, these are some of the traditional ways that indigenous people of the North, all through the Northern Hemisphere, have used Wolverines, and something that they're very famous for. And it's because they're built like polar bears to be able to withstand climate that no other animals can withstand. And so, of course, Wolverines are known to be tremendously difficult to catch. And I'm not going to go into how you do it, but there are some ways you can trap Wolverines, and they are trapped. But traditionally, it's they may be the most difficult animal to trap in the North. So we have a trapper's cabin. They run on dog teams. Although that's just a dog mushing picture I took in Churchill. And then here's a book that, people up in the North, the trappers, they would call them demons. Now, why? Do they attack people? No, they don't. I mean, all the Wolverines I've ever seen have been running away as elusive as any animal I've seen in nature. So they don't run up and try to attack people. They have a reputation when it comes to food for being incredibly fearless, and have been known to drive, say, wolves off kills, even grizzly bears off kills. And I will say, just for full disclosure, I have actually seen dead Wolverine that was killed by a brown bear. So I'm not saying they're tough enough to beat those animals, but they put up a fight that a lot of animals, even a pack of wolves or a grizzly bear, a lot of times deems not worth it for several reasons. I mean, they're just fearless. And then when you get into a fight with them, it's like a pit bull, being a small dog, but so powerful and such a good fighter, and low to the ground and hard to hurt, that animals don't really want to mess with them. And so that's one of their things. But the reason why the trappers would believe that they were demons is if they accidentally got caught in a wolf trap or a lynx trap or some other kind of snare or a leg hold trap, they are so strong they can just break the wire. And if they can't break it because it's a chain, they just chew their foot off without even thinking about it and leave. So it's very difficult to catch them. The other thing that they'll do is they're smart enough not to get caught. And so when the trappers normally will set, these baited stations along these trails in the wintertime, and Wolverines will catch on to that. And then before the trapper gets there to get whatever it's trapping, lynx, marten, stuff, the Wolverine just eats everything. So they lose all their stuff when a Wolverine kind of gets on your trail. Then what they do, to make matters even worse, is when you're gone, they've been known to break into your cabin, just like maybe a bear would. But not only just eat everything that they can eat before they leave, they are very similar, very closely related to skunks, and they have almost a similar kind of capacity to spray a stink. So anything that they haven't eaten before you arrive and come back, they've sprayed it, and you can't even do anything with that cabin. I mean, it's something that humans can't tolerate. So yeah, they can be definitely a thorn in the side, or like a very respected legend of the North that makes living in the North very difficult. And I think that's incredibly cool. So as I've been in the North and talking to people in Wolverine country, I'm always looking for stories. And I remember once there was a wildlife biologist when I was a technician for the Fish and Wildlife Service out in Galena, in western interior Alaska. He said one time he was doing a wolf survey, so flying basically in the wintertime, doing these transects and trying to get a population of wolves in the Nowitna and Kayukuk National Wildlife Refuges, and he was following a wolf trail in the snow of a pack. And he followed it, and all of a sudden he realized he caught up to the pack from the air. He's in the air. And then he saw that they were chasing a wolverine, so he just kept circling to see what was going to happen. And the wolverine ran into a thick clump of spruce, because it was mostly treeless landscape, a thick clump of spruce trees. And all the wolves just piled right into this clump of spruce and to go after him. And then right away, the wolves were popping out of there like popcorn. It's like they got in there and they said, wow, this guy is like serious for its size, unbelievably powerful creature. So just a legend. It's a legendary animal. And there's a reason why, one of the famous comic book characters there on the lower right is Wolverine. And what is he? He's just a fairly small guy, but there's just tremendous claws and tenacious spirit and super, super strong. So yeah, it's a good animal to have as like a comic book sort of hero. But they're very powerful for their size, is all I can say. I mean, their bite strength is about average for carnivores, because they're mostly just eating, scavenging. But their density and their musculature and their skeletal system is very, very, very powerful. Now I'm going to look at their jaws, or their skull. I'm sorry. So you look at the skull, and what I see is it's a big, broad skull, and it does have a really good strength. But what I really find fascinating about wolverines is their dentition. And I've talked about dentition in some of my webinars before. Like a panda doesn't have big canines like other bears because it's eaten bamboo. It's just got major, like, thick molars for grinding the bamboo. Something like a tiger or a polar bear that kills things has really, really big canines. Well, look at the canines and the incisors of a wolverine. I took these this morning on my phone because I have a wolverine skull that somebody gave me. I mean, you look at that, and that is about as intimidating a set of teeth I've ever seen on any animal. I mean, that's built for killing and dispatching things. And they do, and they know. I mean, they've seen them, and I've seen videos on YouTube of a wolverine basically going after a big, like, member of the deer species. I mean, they've even been known to kill caribou, and if they can, like, they jump down from a tree to get one, and as soon as they get on the back of your neck, then they just start working on the back of your neck, and they can kill things. So they're pretty amazing predators, but really they're not. Really, their specialty is they're like hyenas. Hyenas are amazing predators in Africa, but they're specialized more in scavenging. So you look at their teeth, and these are very, very amazing. So these are the molars here, and they are fairly thin because they will be doing lots of cutting, and their molars will be able to shear tendons and flesh because they're almost like meat scissors. But then you've got these right here. This upper molar is rotated inward. So this is the tooth, but it's rotated inward to give more surface area. And it's thought that helps them to crush bones up and also be able to eat carcasses that are frozen totally solid. So pretty cool stuff. Reminds me a lot of these teeth, which are hyena. Hyena also, they definitely can do some ripping with these parts of these. This is a pretty shearing line there, but then they've got these extensions here. to help them eat bones. And biologists have found wolverines or tranquilized wolverines, and their stomach. I mean, they reported that their stomach feels like it's full of rocks, and it's just because they are surviving on bones. Their feet really are amazing too. These are a set of tracks that I got when I was guiding in Churchill. And the interesting about wolverine tracks is they're huge, and they look very similar to, like, the size-wise to a wolf track, even though it's a much smaller animal. Kind of like a lynx, but the way you can really tell, anyway, they got oversized feet so they have more surface area, and they act as snowshoes, because really where they survive the best is in deep snow. But the way you can tell, and it looks a lot like a lynx track right here, or a wolf track, and the size-wise, you can see that there's lots of fur that makes it wider, so it's a well-insulated track foot. But here's the deal with all the mustelids, and this is something interesting to know, is that you can tell the difference between a mustelid track, which is a member of the weasel family, which I'm going to talk about more of the weasel family afterwards, versus a canine dog family or feline cat family track, because these have 5 toes. 1, 2, 3, 4, then there's this 5th toe. Well, you know it's a member of the weasel family. You see how big it is, you know it's a wolverine. This is Drew's picture again. This is just the best example of just looking at these awesome feet they have. They're plantigrade like a bear, meaning they're on their palms of their foot rather than up on their toes, which is called digitigrade like dogs and cats. But huge surface area, and then these awesome claws, which are sort of semi-retractable. They can extend them if they need to, but not as much so as a cat, which is fully retractable. But these are the feet that allow them to travel, and they routinely, just on average, I think, from what I've heard, and not much is known about wolverines. They're just very difficult to study, but like 15 miles a day, but not 15 miles on a trail. I'm talking 15 miles on just through some of the most steep, harsh, snow-covered country in the world, in the Rockies, Alaska, Canada, Siberia, Finland, Sweden, those kind of areas. And the ranges, like I said, are 600 square miles, up to, not always, but they can be. So these guys are just travelers with their feet. And those claws are specially designed. They can do some very much digging, very good at digging. They're also very good at gripping ice. See how hooked they are? I've talked a lot about claw structure with polar bears being very good at, like, grapples, where they can hook on ice. They're excellent tree climbers. They're very, very good swimmers, and those big feet act like paddles. So it is just like a little version of a polar bear that lives in the mountains. And this is, as I'm talking to people, asking them, hey, because I'm just always asking. So I see somebody that's lived up in Katmai or Denali or something all their life. Have you ever seen a wolverine? Well, most people say no, but the ones that usually say yes are the bush pilots, the guys that are flying over mountains in the wilderness, because how they see them is they always, I've heard so many of these stories. Oh, I was flying in the wintertime, flying over, and at the very top of the ridge was a wolverine running. So a lot of reports of them being up in these areas where, I don't know, nobody knows why they would be all the way up there, but is it just for fun, or who knows? But a lot of times pilots will see them or see their tracks at the very, very tops of mountains. So like they just kind of legendary. There's I just wanted to, yeah, there was a radio tagged young male wolverine that summited the highest peak in Glacier National Park. And the last 5,000 feet was up a sheer, nearly vertical ice rampart, and he did it in 90 minutes. And then they actually, I think it was, the wolverine was G5 because he was radio tagged. Then they always called that ascent to the peak the G5 route, and humans can't do it. But a wolverine did it in 90 minutes. This was in the Mount Cleveland in Glacier. It was a 10,500 foot peak. Another thing, just legendary kind of stuff, is In April, and in 2016, a rancher shot and killed a wolverine in North Dakota. And unfortunately, man, this guy, because he was named M56. He was a radio collared individual that started, he was collared at first in Yellowstone, and he became famous because in 2009, he went 500 miles south and started hanging around in Rocky Mountain National Park, Colorado. So that's pretty impressive. 500 miles, and then he lived for several years at the very highest, like 14,000 foot peaks. Then he dropped his collar, and they didn't know where he was. And then in 2012 is when he dropped his collar in Colorado. In 2016, he wound up in North Dakota. So I mean, just think about that. And there was some other stories about his journeys as he was going down to Colorado. We crossed Interstate 80 on Memorial Day weekend. But you know, there's a lot of stuff that just remains a mystery. Like, what was he doing? Well, he's probably looking for females, and there's not just a lot of wolverines down in that area anymore. And a lot of times, like I said, why are these wolverines going all the way up these, 10,000, 11,000 foot? Why are they up at the tops of the ridges in the wintertime on the Alaska range? What are they doing? Well, it's begun as we've learned. Well, I'm not a wolverine biologist, but those guys have found out that the wolverines females, they prefer, and if not need, to dig a den, usually 15 feet down into the snow in the wintertime. They want a snow den, and they want that snow to last up until at least May 15th, and that they actually need that. So I can show you here. It's pretty neat. This is a very cool Wolverine resource that's on the internet called wolverinefoundation.org, and so you can just read all about Wolverines on those guys. But this is the only picture I found that was decent. I don't know, it's probably in captivity, but the Wolverines are actually born pure white, the little babies. And then as I'm talking about Wolverine reproduction, just basically what happens with them is they have mating season sometime in the summer, it's normally around June, July. And yeah, I could estimate and go into different theories, but it probably is just that female wants to make use of the summer to eat. It's very similar to the delayed implantation of bears. And they also want to have a den, an ice den, it's thought, because they don't deal with hot temperatures very well. They want to actually be in an ice den, a snow den. They have their babies sometime in the early winter, or no, yeah, they'll have birth sometime in the mid-winter time, and then have their kits kind of in late winter. But they want to have those babies in the den up until somewhere basically they need their snow cover until like May 15th. So that is kind of where it comes down to, like, this is the worldwide distribution of wolverines. And you'll see, they obviously like boreal forest and Arctic environments, and kind of with the exception of going down all the way down into Montana, maybe Colorado, Washington State, Idaho, because there's really what we're thinking now is that it's because there's enough snow in the spring. That's kind of what they need. They need this springtime snow. They operate better in the snow. They travel better in the snow. They disperse out. They can hunt better in the snow. They just sort of dominate where there's snow. If there's not, they just don't do as well. So that kind of brings me to the point of there's just another animal that is suffering from climate change. And there's lots of them out there. Polar bears being probably the biggest, but then, yeah, the wolverine for sure. And conservation groups have been fighting for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to list them as endangered in the lower 48 for 20 years, and they have still not succeeded. And they've tried several times, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, I mean, it's a long story. I mean, I can't go into all of it, but just like U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service says, no, you guys don't have enough data. Well, the wolverines are so difficult to study. There's just not enough hard data to show that they need to have this, the strict protection. I mean, the Fish and Wildlife Service cannot just protect any animal for the heck of it, because it has economic impacts. It's a pretty big deal when it's an endangered species. I mean, it will shut down mine projects and, ski resort development and snow machine access and all kinds of things. And so they have to be very serious about it. If you don't have the data, then they can't just say, well, wolverines are cool, let's just designate them endangered. They can't do that unless they can really show And then, but recently, the Fish and Wildlife Service was sued, and they won to get that done, and that was in 2016. But the Fish and Wildlife Service basically hasn't done anything yet. So just in mid-January, there was conservation groups are beginning to sue the Trump administration for not listing the wolverine. And the reason, there's only about 250 to 300 wolverines in the lower 48. So Washington State, a little bit of Oregon maybe, and Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, and then maybe possibly sometimes they come into Colorado or California, but that's all part of their original range. Well, they've lost it because of habitat loss, for sure. But now it's thought that these little refuges that have the snow, normally deep snowpack up until past May 15, are running out. And if those areas run out, then it's basically the breeding habitat's running out. So you look at a wolverine and you say that's an amazing animal. It's a legend. It's just like Bigfoot. I mean, it's even got a larger than life legendary reputation, kind of from what I was saying, as grizzly bears. So some people out there like myself and a lot of people, we want to keep wolverines around. So we need to do more connection of these refuges that have the snow so that wolverines can go back and forth and they're not isolated. And then we also have to, once again, address climate change. And as the snowpack in the spring disappears because our climate's getting warmer, so will the wolverine. So that's kind of wolverines. There's not a ton known about them. I'm sure I left out some stuff, but if you have questions at the end. But I've drawn your attention to this incredible animal, the wolverine. Now there's 56 different species in the world, from the Mustelidae, the weasel family. And there's so many incredible creatures in this family that I just wanted to show you some of their other relatives. I don't have the material to do entire webinars on either one, so I'm just going to kind of go through, and I don't have time ever to go through every one of the 56 species, but I just picked a few out that I think are pretty cool and I think you guys will enjoy hearing about. Well, we start out with the very smallest member of the weasel family, which is the least weasel, and they are tiny, but for their size, it's unbelievable that the kind of prey they go after. I think it was least weasels and then the short-tailed weasel. They both can turn white in the winter. The other weasel family doesn't do that, but they're brown in the summer and white in the winter. The short-tailed weasel is a little bit bigger. It's got that black tip on the tail, and it's called the short-tailed weasel. Also, the stoat over in Europe has the same one, and they also often call it the ermine. And these guys are, for their size, pound for pound, like the fastest, most relentless, strongest for their size predator probably on Earth. They can actually go after snowshoe hares and kill them, which would be like, I guess I read something where it said it compared that to your Chihuahua going after a yearling calf. Like that's the kind of size difference. And they do that just by skill and speed and just tenacious spirit. I had one in my woodpile in Homer, and he sometimes I would pull a log out at night and he'd be in there and he'd come after me and charge me. This is something that's like less than a foot long, tiny little guy, like 6 ounces. And he, in the wintertime, they do really well because there's something called, and I will talk about with other members of the weasel family, when you get deep snow, there's the layer between the snow and the ground is called the subnivean layer, and most rodents, basically all the small rodents of the north, as long as there's good snowpack, they can actually live under there. They don't care. The ground will radiate about 32 degrees. So they have tunnels and they run around in there. And if it could be minus 50, but snow insulates a lot, very, very well. So then there'll be these rodents in these tunnels. And then ermine just basically spend their whole winter. They're just going along these little snow tunnels, hunting rodents underneath the snow. Pretty amazing. Here's some skulls from my house I took this morning. So there's a weasel right there. And I will have to say, this is sad, and I wish he didn't do it, but you know how things happen. But there was this ermine actually that was living in my woodpile. just was really, really aggressive. And still have him, but he's not a big, super muscular, kind of old feral cat that I tamed, and now he's always my buddy forever. But yeah, but he definitely is a tough cat. And one night I heard things just getting thrown around in our shed, just like I thought there was it was in the midwinter, but I thought it was a bear in there. I mean, there was stuff getting knocked over, and it was actually my 20-pound cat fighting this ermine. And by the time I got in there, but it'd been a pretty brutal fight. And this is a tough cat, but this ermine was probably the toughest thing it's ever fought. He did lose, and I did get the skull for educational purposes. But you see how small the skull is compared to the wolverine skull, which is here. The wolverine is the largest land member of the weasel family, terrestrial member of the weasel family, because some of the aquatic members of the weasel family. Wolverines, you're going to ask, Wolverines are about 20 to 50 pounds. Females average 20, males average 50. And then the biggest Wolverine ever, a male, can be 70. But then you've got, this one is the largest member of the weasel family. It's the sea otter. And that's the skull of the sea otter. And it can get to be 100 pounds. Sea otters. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about sea otters. So here's a skull right here to the right of a pure predator. It's a lynx. And there we go with those. This is a classic predatory dentition. Long canines for killing with one bite. Mostly snowshoe hares for these guys. And there's a gap right here so that there's no teeth getting in the way of the kill bite. And then the molars are known as carnassial, which are like meat scissors. And then you've got the sea otter, which isn't going out and chasing large prey and killing it. It's swimming, and it's killing and eating these shellfish, crustaceans and shellfish like clams, sea urchins, things like that. And so it's got these extraordinary molars basically for crushing up shellfish. So that was pretty cool. I think that's kind of neat. These are just skulls from my collection, stuff I found over the years. So everybody loves sea otters. We see a lot of sea otters out on the coast of Katmai. This one's eating a snow crab. It was pretty neat. I've never seen something quite like this before. But as you see, sea otters, or all members of the weasel family, tend to go after animals and have the ability to go after animals much larger than they are. This is a good example of how sea otters can also sort of dominate for their size. This is a pretty tough thing to kill with the pinchers and heavy and everything like that. But sea otters are really amazing, and they really, the most amazing thing about them, well, I'll start out with, they're actually a keystone species, and we've talked about that. But a keystone species is something that if you take it out of the equation, they will basically not, the ecosystem will fail. And this is one of the best examples, because one of the sea otter's favorite food is sea urchins. Well, sea urchins, their favorite food is the roots of kelp. So if you don't have sea otters to limit the number of sea urchins, then the whole kelp forest will be decimated. And the kelp forest is something so productive. It's mostly a breeding ground and a place where fish lay eggs, and you need kelp. And sea otters, they love kelp. They wrap themselves up in it to keep them from washing away in storms, and they protect those kelp beds by limiting the number of sea otters. So they're a keystone species. They're very famous because they actually caused the colonization of Alaska and all the way down into even California by the Russians. And the reason why is because their fur is so incredible. And the reason it's so incredible is there's 1 million times, it's 1,000 times more dense than human hairs. There's 1 million hairs per square inch. And that is because it's an animal that lives in cold water, like seals, whales, sea lions, but it doesn't use blubber to insulate. So it's just this one kind of freakish mammal that has a fur so dense that it will trap air inside. And so the fur actually isn't doing the insulating, it's the air that this dense fur is trapping. So they have like basically bubbles around their skin that allows them to be able to just sit in 30, 40, 50 degree water and not have any problems. But yeah, those are sea otters. I took this picture in my pond, my spring-fed pond, which is about I can see it right now, looking out the window. This old female of river otter lives in there, and then goes up and down the creeks, but she actually uses the pond on my property as a denning site, raises her babies. And yesterday I was 90 something degrees here in Arkansas in the Ozarks, and I went down with my wife and with floating on our tubes up in this pond, and the mother and her 3 babies from this year were there, and I didn't have bring my camera down there, but she's actually pretty used to me. And I was floating around, and I mean, I basically I wasn't looking very intimidating because I'm just sitting in a float tube, kind of drifting off. And eventually, but she's just sitting there watching me, and I drift up within 7 feet of her. I got a real good look. I asked her, I said, "Wow, you're pretty cool. You want to join me tomorrow for my mustelid weasel family webinar? Because you're going to be in it." And she didn't say anything. But this is her, so yeah, it's pretty beautiful. I can go down and actually watch her swimming. This is river otter. And then get close enough actually to be able to get pictures to really see what they eat the most. And if you zoom in on that, you can see that what I found, and I've watched her for a long time, is crayfish actually are her favorite food. But they'll eat frogs and fish. And these guys are coming up from the Buffalo River, National River, which they were reintroduced there. And it's very controversial because they're very hard on populations of fish, but it's part of the natural ecosystem, and they were reintroduced and they do pretty well. And we have some, and they're very fun to watch. You know, they're very, very curious, very playful. We see lots of river otters on the Tosta Katmai as well. And this interesting here is because it's a river otter, but the otters out there, they will basically spend most of their time in the salt water. They don't care. Their dens are often on islands in the ocean. And while they will definitely, and I see them travel up streams to hunt fish, they actually do very well and do most of their life in the salt water. And this one is it's killed a flounder. That's a flounder head. Yeah. So these are some shots from bear season, just some of the creatures that we see. This one is a river otter from Borneo that I got this time last year in the Kinabatangan River. This is the small clawed otter of Asia. Asia's got probably 5 or 6, I think, different species of river otters. But this is in the jungles of Borneo, where we're looking for pygmy elephants and orangutans, and obviously we come upon a family of river otters. So this one I've never seen. This is high on the bucket list, but this is the Amazonian. It's a giant otter. These guys can get to 5.5 feet long. Enormous. This is the longest of all the members of the weasel family. And this is, I've been a big fan of this guy. And whenever I need stuff, the rarest animals out there, and I messaged him last night, Sean McHugh, said, "Hey, do you have any Amazonian river otter pictures?" Sure, no problem, because he's done a ton of amazing research in the neotropics. So this is going to be, no, oh man, I forgot to do a range map. But these are, yeah. Anyway, these are from the Amazon and Guyana, all the way northern South America. This is where the giant Amazonian river otter lives. So these are incredible. They actually feed on caiman, which is the Amazonian crocodile. And I have seen footage of them backing down jaguars, because they usually come with a very, they're great in the water, very aggressive. Jaguars a lot of times are around the water, and there can be families of, imagine 6 or 7 of these guys. They're all almost 6 feet long, and they've got the tenacity of all the members of the weasel family. And they've backed down jaguars, which is about the most studly of all of the big cats. And they eat caimans and also fish and anything kind of in the water. They'll eat anything that's meat. But yeah, and then this is, I just wanted to give a credit to Sean McHugh. There's his Instagram page. You can see some awesome stuff. I think he's doing stuff in Florida right now. So of course, this is he does. He's got a lot of game camera footage of Florida panthers and black bears and different stuff. So he bounces around much more than I ever did. And this is one of the most unknown and very, very mystical kind of mustelid species. It's basically like similar to, it's like an arboreal wolverine of the neotropics of South America. There's its range map. It's called the Tyra. I was lucky enough to see one time when I was in the Coxcomb Basin in Belize. I was helping rangers do a backcountry anti-poaching patrol on the kind of the border of Guatemala in Belize. And we got back to this super, super remote research camp that had been abandoned. And the first thing we did, we came into this clearing and saw this tyra run up halfway up a tree and just look at us. And it's just the power of it and the speed was pretty phenomenal. And I'll never forget that. I'm super, super lucky to be able to see this incredible weasel family carnivore. And I'm gonna just try to kind of play this. This is Sean's game camera footage of a tyra. Hope it comes out. If it doesn't, go to his Instagram page and check him out. There's the American badger. I think this is an animal that I lived in Montana for a few years, and I became sort of a joke with all my friends, is because on my free time I would go out and look for badgers. I've never seen one in the wild. It is right up there. It's probably, if I could just pick animal I want to see in the wild and watch in the wild right now, what's the number one? It's probably the American badger. They're not that hard to find. I've just not been really lucky. I've got some pretty funny stories about how I spend a lot of time. But these guys it's a badger, and they have long claws. They're incredible diggers, and they go after things like prairie dogs, any gophers, ground squirrels. And Yellowstone's a great place to see them. The Badlands of South Dakota is another good place, but they kind of live out in the Great Plains, in a place where they haven't been trapped out, because badgers make big holes. Ranchers don't like big holes in their pastures because their livestock can get their foot broken or something like that. And they generally most ranchers don't like what they would call vermin like these guys, but I think they're incredible and amazing diggers. There's other badgers in the world, and this is a hog badger that I got in the mountains of China when we were up in giant panda habitat. This is a Malay badger in the jungles of Borneo that I found one night on a night walk in Danam Valley, and let me get pretty close as he was snuffling around. It's also, the other name for this guy is the Sunda skunk, because I'm not talking much about skunks. There's too many animals to talk about. I just picked a few, but this really is more of a skunk than a badger. And he kept snuffling closer and closer and closer, and then he got very close, and I kind of moved and made a noise. And he turned around and began to walk away, but he sprayed me. That's the only time I've ever been sprayed by a skunk. I didn't mind. Okay, back to Sean McHugh again. He has done some really cool fisher research in Idaho. So this is American fisher. And as far as the terrestrial weasel family, it's the next one down from the wolverine by being big and strong. And ferocious, it's very arboreal, likes to climb in trees a lot. In fact, it's specialized mostly in going after red squirrels. Sean said they also found, lots of other stuff. I'm just trying to see what he saw. Snowshoe hares is another one. So these guys can chase down snowshoe hares, which is very impressive. To be able to catch a snowshoe hare in the snow, you got to be really, really good. Yeah, red squirrel, ruffed grouse, and snowshoe hare are the top prey animals for these. I'm sorry, that's for the marten, which is my next one. Anyway, but the fisher also eats those same things, but they're very, very specialized in going up in the trees and catching squirrels. It's incredibly fast. They've kind of made a bit of a comeback. You can see the range map. I saw one fisher in the wild on the Cassiar Highway, northern BC, one time right around here. Ran across the road. I was very excited. But where you hear most about fisher sightings is over here in New England, where they're kind of making a comeback. And one of the things that they like to eat the most when they get around humans is actually domestic cats. So they have no problem catching and eating domestic cats, which shows that they're pretty tough critters. They also are famous for being one of the animals that specializes in eating porcupines. And the way you can do that is if you're fast enough, you'd flip the porcupine over, and they do that. They eat a lot of red squirrels. Now, this pine marten is an animal that I kind of grew up thinking that it was specialized to eat red squirrels. It also eats red squirrels in the forest, but one of the things when I was doing research on small mammals in Alaska is we ran into a ton of pine martens in areas where there were lots and lots of voles, after areas where there had been a beetle kill or a forest fire, and the small mammal population was really, really, really high. It'd be the most martens there. And what we were finding, and those biologists up there were finding, is that they are very specialized in not just getting squirrels, but in the wintertime, they go down, just like I would mention ermines do, the subnivean layer. So they go down to beneath the snow, up against the ground, and then they just go running around through these tunnels and eat lots of voles. And then, as Sean said, also ruffed grouse and snowshoe hares are also high on their list. But other parts of the world have really cool martens. Now this one has blown my mind. I've seen these guys in China, in the Minshan Mountains, many times, and I think it's maybe the most beautiful of all the mustelads. This is the yellow-throated marten, just stunning. And these guys are pretty interesting because they're almost like otters, that they will travel and hunt in a pack, usually 2 to 3. And most of the times I've seen them, these guys in the wild, they have actually been 2 to 3, and they just go tearing down a drainage with one on one side of the river, one in the middle, and one on the other side. And they just go, and then when one of them, there's just like a strategic formation, and then one of them will find something, and then they go kill it together. And they're very legendary. They even live, here's their range, all the way through the Himalayas, northern India, up China, all the way up into like almost, yeah, through the mountains of China. And then they get into the tropics as well. But this is a picture through one of my coolest field guides for mammals I've ever seen, is the mammals of Borneo. This one's awesome because it's got all these pictures kind of depicting different stories and observations from all these guides. And they, in Borneo, they do see yellow-throated marten hunting in packs, and actually together killing sambar deer, which is basically as big as a mule deer. And these are 3 martens that go after deer. So it's just awesome stuff. And I've never seen one of these guys before. This is a Malay weasel, which actually looks a little bit more like a smaller marten. But I just wanted to show you this picture, and from the book as well. And just look at that bushy tail and an orange color. What a cool mustelid, huh? Okay, now we're getting kind of towards the end here, and I wanted to finish off with something that a member of the weasel family, that its reputation is just as famous for being a badass as the wolverine, and it's the honey badger. Now they made some videos. The honey badger don't care, that have become viral, and everybody I think kind of has heard of the honey badger. And I went many trips to Africa, never saw one, but this last year I was in Namibia and I saw 4 different ones in the wild, and it really kind of made my year. It was very high on my bucket list. So these guys are just, there's something that they love to go into, things that other animals can't tolerate, like killer bee nests. They don't care, they go for them. They will eat anything, any kind of poisonous snake, such as the cobra. What happens apparently from observations that I've heard is, these are not my pictures, they're just ones on the web, is they will get bit by a severely poisonous snake, like a black mamba or something, and then they will go to sleep, and then somehow during sleep they will detoxify the poison, wake up, and be fine. It's something that would kill an elephant almost, I think. Leopards and lions can't kill them. They just never give up. They don't have any fear. They're incredibly strong, fast, dense, and they also have a skunk spray. So it's just an animal that, like these young lions might mess with for a while. But once they realize that, I think I talked to one of the guides in Namibia, said that they did see a honey badger get killed by lions, but it took them 2 hours to kill it. This is a group of lions. So it's an animal that definitely earns a lot of respect. And they also are good at killing porcupines. And they, of course, and these African porcupines are huge, and look at these spines, but as the saying goes, honey badger don't care. Okay, so I'm kind of finishing up on my hour here. So if you want to read more about wolverines, there's a biologist, Doug Chadwick, that wrote a book called The Wolverine Way. Fantastic. And he also did a film with PBS called Chasing the Phantom. And if you want internet reading and more stuff on wolverines, you would go to wolverinefoundation.org. I'll give you guys a second to write that down. Yeah, wolverines are, they're part of our American lore, like the grizzly bear and the wolf, and in the Arctic, the polar bear. It's one of these incredible animals that is legendary, and we'd hate to lose him. So we need to just build appreciation for him. Okay, so for further research, once again, you want to see the coolest stuff ever, go all the way back to where he was in the Amazon with jaguars, spectacled bears. I mean, stuff that it blows my mind. So Sean McHugh Wildlife, you can search that on Instagram, and he's one of my favorite. It's probably my favorite page on Instagram. And then my buddy Drew, who's leader of the Pebble Mine fight, because I forgot to say this. Yeah, the Pebble Mine habitat. So that Katmai Coast. I mean, if I tell people I've seen 3 in Churchill in the wild, but if I say, oh yeah, I've seen 10 wolverines on the Katmai Coast, it shows that that is incredibly good wolverine habitat on the Alaska Peninsula. And again, it's just one more reason why the Pebble Mine is not a good idea, because this is one of the last strongholds of wolverines. Further reading, you can go to my blog site. And I apologize to anybody that I was supposed to do a blog about answering questions from my last one about ravens, and I am going to do that. I just had lots of things come up and I didn't get a chance. But I'm going to do a post on showing the recording of this webinar. Also, you'll get the recordings sent to you as a link, and I'll answer any questions that you guys have sent in, because I'm already almost in an hour, so I don't have time to answer all those questions. So I'll write them out, and I'll do the one for ravens as well. And then there's my Instagram page, Brad Joseph's Photos. My YouTube channel does have one of my terrible quality but wolverine sightings towards the end, and it's got lots of wildlife footage. So just Brad Joseph's on YouTube. And that is my last slide, Kendall. I'm hoping you're still there. Did my internet hold out?
I'm still here. Well, thank you. That was really interesting. They're such beautiful creatures. We do have some questions, and if you do have questions for Brad, I just want to remind you that you can submit those in the control panel in the questions field. And like Brad said, we're a little short on time for questions, so we'll get to as many as we can in the next few minutes. But if we don't answer your question, you can look for Brad's blog post in a few days. Okay, Brad.
I promise I'll do it.
I trust you. How long are the wolverines? You mentioned they can be up to around 50 pounds, but how long can they be?
I think about 3 feet long with the tail.
Right. Yeah. And how long do they live?
They're estimated kind of average in the wild is 7 to 13 years old. So they don't live very long. They've got a really, really hard life. Similar to wolves. While dogs can live, a long time, in the wild, a wolf average lifespan's only 7. And I'm not talking, it's just 7 years old. So anyway, yeah, so wolverines are a fairly short-lived species. They live life hard and fast, and it's a rough one.
Okay. And are wolverines social creatures, or are they loners?
They're very much loners, and they will share. When I say that their home range can be 600 square miles, they can. They've been sort of studied and found to be very territorial, kind of like wolves. Bears are not territorial. Bears have their personal space, but they share their home range with a lot of other bears. Wolverines don't like to do that. So yeah, they're very much loners until they come together, mate, and then the females will basically keep their cubs for around the total of around a year, and that's it. So that's the only time they ever want to be near other wolverines. But otters are very social. And then I also found that yellow-throated martens are very social, can be social in small groups.
Okay. You just answered another question of how long do babies stay with mom, but how many are usually in a litter?
Yeah, that's a good, I'm sorry, 2 to 3. Okay. Average of 2. So it can be 1 to 3, average 2.
There have been some people who are curious about how fast wolverines can run.
I never clocked one or saw somebody give a thing, but I know that I've seen them outrun big, lean, long-legged brown bears like it was no problem. So I'm gonna have to say it can be up to 30 miles an hour. They're not, yeah, they can very fast, and their ability to cover ground for a day. I think Doug Chadwick said, he said, a human being could. He said Doug said when one of his quotes was, I'm a guy that's in really good shape and I'm a really good climber and stuff. He said I would be super proud of myself if I could cover the ground in 1/10 of what a wolverine would in a day. Then I would be amazed at myself.
That's amazing. And there were a lot of questions about Michigan and Wolverines, since that's the mascot of the university. So they want to, the biggest question was, how long ago did Wolverines leave Michigan, or can you even still see them there?
I think as I was doing research, I thought I saw something and I didn't look it up, but maybe one had been sighted there recently, but generally no. And it's probably been, I'm going to guess, probably 100 years, 50 to 100 years since the Wolverine was extirpated out of Michigan. So it's possible maybe northern Minnesota, but it's just not far enough north, and it even in the UP. But anyway, I can look into that more. But
Sure. Yeah.
yeah,
All
they're
right.
not. Yeah, that most of the time they're not around
Yeah. Right.
in Michigan.
Okay.
You got to go
Well,
north into Canada.
okay. It is the top of the hour, so that was the last question we have time for today. So I'll hand it back over to you, Brad, for some closing comments.
Okay. Thank you guys for letting me talk about an animal that's not quite as charismatic as elephants. And like next week, I'm going to do orangutans, and then their other apes of the Asia, or grizzly bears to polar bears. But there's still lots of cool animals out there. And then the weasel family really is one of my favorite families of animals. So the superstar for me is the wolverine, but you got all kinds of cool critters in there. So just another example of how amazing the wildlife in our world is, and just so glad that people want to spend the time to learn more about it. So that's pretty much it, guys.
All right, well, thanks everyone for joining us today, and be sure to join us tomorrow for our next Daily Dose of Nature. We did record today's presentation, so we'll get that replay out to you soon. And with that, I'll conclude the webinar. Thank you, Brad. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye, guys.